Palestins vivent sous une situation de concentration. Il y a eu Auschwitz et mutatis mutandis. On peut parler d'une certaine façon d'Auschwitz dans la situation en que sont maintenant les Palestiniens. Donc cette déclaration qui a été une provocation délibérée, c'est évident qu'il y a ici une exagération. Ce n'est pas la même chose, tout à fait la même chose. Mais de toute façon, il y a quelque chose qu'on ne pouvait pas ou qu'on ne devait pas admettre. Ce que je dis, ce que je fais, c'est rien. Mais ce que je ne peux pas, c'est de me taire. Je ne peux pas, c'est contre ma nature plus profonde, disons. Je ne peux pas me taire.
Alors, toutes les nouvelles qu'ils ont à Ramallah, c'est que l'offensive commencera à la minute de la fin du Shabbat. On vient de nous appeler de Ramallah pour nous dire que les autorités israéliennes ont demandé à la totalité des ONG qui sont en activité dans la ville de l'évacuer immédiatement. Et les gens sont en train de stocker des provisions partout dans les maisons.
الشهيدة بنت الشهيدة بنت الشهيد وأخت الشهيد وأخت الشهيدة كنة أم الشهيد حفيدة جد شهيد وجارة عم الشهيد إلى آخره إلى آخره إلى آخره. ولا شيء يحدث في العالم المتمدد فالزمن البربري انتهى والضحية مجهولة الاسم عادية والضحية مثل الحقيقة نسبية إلى آخره إلى آخره إلى آخره.
月朗星稀，公路上几乎没有车辆。我一路打盹儿，到特拉维夫的旅馆已经12点半了。雅埃尔在柜台上等我们。他大约40岁，犹太人。 自己开一家小出版社。雅尔告诉我们，萨尔马狗的言论引起轩然大波。他在以色列很红，一本小说卖到6万册，在以色列可算得畅销了。代表的其他成员还要在以色列待2天，和当地作家及反战组织的人见面。
Would anybody like to take this microphone out of my hand? To begin with.
Quand vous devez comparer les méfaits et les crimes réels qu'Israël commet dans le territoire occupé et qui sont révoltants, contre lesquels il faut s'élever, comme les gens l'ont fait ici, pour ne pas répéter, avec Auschwitz, quand vous avez comparé ça avec Auschwitz, vous n'avez pas servi, à mon avis, la cause palestinienne. Vous l'avez rendu un mauvais service. Parce que ce genre de comparaison ferme les oreilles des Israéliens moyens, à toute critique que vous pouvez faire de l'occupation, même justifiée.
Je ne sais pas si les Palestiniens tous les Palestiniens ou les Palestiniens responsables sont d'accord avec vous. Je le prends comme une opinion personnelle. Ne dites pas que c'est à cause de moi et à cause de ce que j'ai dit que Ramallah sera probablement bombardé.
The Palestinian narrative and the Israeli narrative about this conflict could have happened in 2 different planets. Everything connected with our life look completely different from the Israeli point of view and the Palestinian point of view. And every single event of the last 120 years looks completely different to an ordinary Israeli and an ordinary Palestinian, everything. And therefore, the group to which I belong, Gush Shalom, the Peace Bloc, has tried to draw up a document trying to integrate both narratives into one joint narrative about this conflict. And one has to understand what the other side is feeling and thinking, what animates the other side, if we want to get into, in the end, to a real solution of peace.
I think that the Israeli peace camp, maybe it was never born, but for sure it has disappeared in the past 2 years, much because of usage of bad words. One of them, this obsession that we have all the time to speak about us and the Palestinians as two equals in the wrong sense, that both of us are suffering, the two sides are suffering, and we are engaged in a mutual vicious circle of violence, the both sides equally responsible for this vicious circle of violence. Well, I must say that I want to protest against this false balancing, this false usage of words. It's not that two equal sides are engaged in violence. There is one side who is the occupier. There is one side who has managed in the past 50 years to monopolize the notion of being the victim. And we continue to call the Palestinian outburst, the Palestinian war of independence and resistance to our occupation as violence. This is not just violence, this is a legitimate uprising, and I trust you that you are going back to your countries and you are going to help us to get rid of some of this false mythology that I think that we are also the victims of. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Au cours de ce séjour en Palestine, j'ai compris à quel point les mots pouvaient être assiégés par d'autres mots. J'ai vu la souffrance que font lever les analogies stupides, et j'ai vu l'appétit des médias pour ces souffrances. La douleur, c'est du langage effondré. Auschwitz en Palestine, la nuit de cristal, Arafat Hitler, l'étoile de David accolée à la croix gammée sur les murs des camps de réfugiés détruits. Stupide télescopage, mutisme de mort, un ballet de spectres, la rage imbécile de tout rendre illisible à tout jamais, l'intouchable de tous côtés. C'est pourquoi les écrivains y sont nécessaires, non pas pour jouer les casques bleus, mais pour faire entendre d'autres voix, opposées à la logique de guerre, non pas une force d'interposition, mais une force d'interprétation.
An open letter to General Ariel Sharon. Sir, you don't know me. There's no reason why you should, and little cause for you to listen to what somebody like myself may have to say. I don't imagine you have time to pay attention to views that do not correspond to your own. In fact, I'm convinced that you do not listen to anybody who doesn't say what you wish to hear. Should it interest you, I'm a writer born in South Africa, now living and working abroad. For some time back there, I also grew up among a chosen people who behaved as herrenvolk, as all those who believe themselves singularized by suffering or entrusted with a special mission from God. I apologize if my comparative allusion to Israel as herrenvolk hurts because of the echoes from a recent past when, in Europe, so many Jews were the victims of a final solution. But how else is one to attempt describing the comportment of your armies when one is flooded by the horror of what you're doing? It is blatantly averred, again and again, that any criticism of Israel's policies is an expression of anti-Semitism. I find this anti-Semitism allegation utterly deplorable, especially coming from Jewish intellectuals who so often constitute the reasonable, rational, and creative backbone of Western societies. Why should we be subjected to this special pleading or look the other way when it is Israel committing crimes? No, General Sharon. Past injustices suffered cannot justify or excuse your present fascist actions. A viable state cannot be built on the expulsion of another people who have as much claim to that territory as you have. Might is not right.
加沙走廊是块沿地中海展开、长46公里、宽6至10公里的狭长地带，约360平方公里。在加沙，120万巴勒斯坦人占60%的土地，是世界上人口最密集的地区。以色列控制了42%的土地，包括定居点、军事基地及隔离区。而以色列犹太移民仅6000人，占加沙总人口的5%。3/4的加沙人是1948年被以色列逐出家园的难民及后代。
And I've seen a lot of forms of violence, starting in the United States and then in the Caribbean and in Haiti and in Latin America and parts of Africa where I've traveled. But I've never seen such grotesque, and I don't know what else to call it, but diabolical form of violence as what's been imposed upon here. And like everybody in our delegation, we've been groping and reaching for comparisons. I mean, we're pretty worldly men. We've traveled widely, and we've lived through, many of us, through half a century or more of history, and so we have some experience and some points of comparison. And then you compare, say, well, to the relationship between the Euro-Americans and the Native Americans, the kind of military dominance followed by displacement followed by reservation system. Exactly. You can see the sequence there. You say, yeah, that's interesting, because you can see over a period of 100 years or so, a system imposed like that. But here, you have cousins living cheek by jowl, who share an enormous overlap of culture and history.
In conflicts, the more you resemble the other side, the more it's violent.
Sure. And then it takes on a psychotic or a pathological level, because you start to project.
Because it's your
guilt.
mirror.
Yeah, exactly. It's with the worst kinds of violence take place within a family, and you start to project onto the victim your own guilt. And I think clearly some of them know this and see this, because I've heard this from Israelis.
Absolutely.
They say, we are, we're killing ourselves here, and in doing that, it's like cutting out your own heart.
And probably peace is long to come, not for this only reason, but also because they know this is their mirror.
Yeah.
And they're afraid of this confrontation. Because when this conflict will be finished, we'll go out from the scene in order to live our lives. And they'll remain with their real image. And they'll have then to ask the question they don't have been asking to themselves for years. What did we do?
Right.
贯穿加沙的唯一一条主要公路是由以色列控制，专供以色列军车和犹太移民使用，而巴勒斯坦人只能挤在土路上，连这条土路还被2道哨卡切割，下午5点以后禁止通行。每到高峰时间简直是灾难，哨卡前排着长龙，路窄常出事故。